fork the project and then clone it to your machine. And open the project that you just cloned, and that's where we're going to start. All right, we've got this network client here. It's pretty simple, but it allows us to fetch data without you having to write this code yet. And then we've already got a model. Oh, let me put my Xcode in presentation mode. And also, I probably should not be using Xcode 10 beta. There we go. Let's just look at what the app does. So I'll run it for you. It's quite simple. I created it in Xcode 10 as well. So you have to go into the app delegate. I'll fix this on GitHub for next time, but go into the app delegate and where it says application did finish launching with options, launch options, get rid of that dot right there. And then make sure the project builds.
Sorry, Andrew, I switched Macs and I was out of, I didn't hear anything for the past 2 minutes. Are we forking the project?
Yes, it's in Slack.
Okay.
The link is in Slack, I mean. And then come in here and delete that period that's right there. All right, let's look at what the app does. Taking its time. Let me quit the simulator and try again. Xcode has lost its mind. Hang on. Hooray! I have lost all my simulators. Just a minute.
Yeah, I don't have any simulators either.
You have to change the deployment target back to 11.4.
Oh, right. Yes. I'm sorry, guys. I was using Xcode 10 beta and forgot that was going to cause all kinds of problems. So come into the project here. Just click on the project in the files list and then under deployment target. Well, sorry, click over here so that you're actually changing the settings for the project, not the app. And then under deployment target, choose 11.4 is fine. And then you should get your simulators back. Who said something? What? And we try running the app again. Okay, so it just shows a list of all of you people these are loaded from the network. They're not in the app. And you can choose whether you want to sort by first name or last name, except it's not, it's backward. I need to fix that. That's an easy fix. So that's all. But we can use the sort function, and this is all loaded from the network using, and we have to use closures, and we have to dispatch back to the main queue. So we get to practice several of these things that we're talking about today. Okay, let's start by, yeah, question.
I have 3 errors, just like Samantha does. And,
I didn't, sorry. Chat. Can you tell me what the errors say?
Failed to create provisioning profile.
Oh, gosh, man.
And then no profiles for com.lambda school.
Yeah.
And
All
then,
right. Come in. Yes, I that's fine. Click on project. Click on the project here. Click on the app here.
Oh, the app.
And then change
Okay.
change team from Lambda to your own personal team.
I did that, and then on the status part, it says failed to try again. Yeah, it says failed to create provisioning profile. I might just here.
Try changing the bundle identifier. So instead of saying com.lambda school, it's your,
Okay.
your name or something.
I just unclicked automatically manage signing. That's fine. I think it'll work for now.
Yeah, we're just running on the simulator, so you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Vuk and Lynn, yeah, there's the reason your simulator is black is because there's no app. We haven't written an app. It's just a project with some starter code. Can everyone else at least build the project? It doesn't need to run. It shouldn't really run because there's nothing in it. There's not even any view controllers, but it should at least build without errors. If you're not
I did what Andrew did, but mine still says 1 error now. Students requires a provisioning profile.
So come back into this screen. Did you change the bundle identifier here?
Yeah.
And then down here, it probably says that there's an error somewhere.
In the signing debug, yeah. It says students requires a provisioning profile.
Can you share your screen?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Change where up in the top where it says generic iOS device. Pick a simulator. And now try building it. Okay, you're fine. Don't worry about those errors right now because those will only cause a problem if you try to put it on a device.
Thanks.
Can you send me to the breakout room?
Oh, yeah, you should be in it. That's something Spencer will actually have to do.
Okay.
Spencer, can you put Timothy in the breakout room?
Okay.
Is Spencer even in here? No. I'll have to send him a message on Slack.
Yeah, I randomly got kicked out of mine.
All right. Well, I've asked Spencer to move you. Hopefully he sees that. There we go. Seems like he's there. All right, great. Okay, so everybody can build the project. I'm sorry about all the trouble. I'll try to get that fixed for next time. We're ready to start building the app. So we're actually going to start in our storyboard. I'll actually put the simulator on screen so we can kind of refer to it. It's pretty simple. There's only one screen. We're not doing like a detailed view controller or anything. So go ahead and drag out what this actually is a view controller with an embedded table view controller and then a segmented control at the top. So drag out a view controller, a regular view controller. And then a separate table view controller. And then all we're going to do is add a stack view, vertical stack view, stick it over here. Zoom window. And then we're going to add some constraints. We'll go 20 on the top and 0 on all the other sides. So it fills the screen. And then we're going to add a plain UI view. So search for UI view and then the one that just says view to the stack view. We're also going to add a container view. So find container view and drag that into the bottom of the stack view. If it's easier, you can drag it over here under view. Not that under view, but this one. I'll give you a second to catch up. So we've got a stack view. Inside the stack view is a view and a container view, and we're going to add more, but I want everyone to catch up.
Sorry, my container view seems to be nested in the view, and I'm trying to drag it out so it's not nested. I got it, I think.
Yeah, so it's the difference between those two.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, you can delete this view controller. We're not going to use it. We're going to hook the table view controller up. And then choose segmented control. And drag that into the view. So you can probably do it this way, but I'm going to do it over here. Make sure it is a subview of the view. So the circle on the blue line should be on the right side of the view icon, not the left, meaning it's going to be a subview of view. Like that. And then what we're going to do is constrain this to 0 on top and 0 on the bottom, and not the sides. We're not constraining the sides. Okay, so that will look wrong. That's okay. We'll fix that in just a second. First, again, on the segmented control, we want to center it horizontally in the container. It should not have any red. constraints. Now, it's all stretched out. Does anyone know why?
Hugging priority?
Yeah, hugging priority. So we're actually going to change the hugging priority on the view that contains the segmented control. We're going to make its vertical hugging priority higher than 250. And I don't know why it's not updating. You may actually, if you can actually resize it. No. Yes. What are you doing? Oh, there we go. It's just storyboards being stupid. But that's good enough for now. The other thing we could do is oh, let me make this one higher too. We could always set a fixed constraint on it too, but this will be fine. Okay, so that now you should see this second UI view. It should fill most of the screen, or at least be visible at the bottom. And we're just going to hook that up to the table view controller. So if you right click and drag, or control click and drag over to the table view controller, and then you should choose not a show segue, but an embed segue, because we're going to embed that. And then we need to give the segue we just created an identifier. I'm going to call it embed students table view.
Wait, what'd you put the hugging one constraint on?
On the view.
Okay.
Okay, let's add some spacing to the stack view. So pick the stack view, and I'm just going to use the standard spacing. Should add a little space there. Oh, I forgot to make our view controller the initial view controller. So select the first view controller and make it the initial one. Now you should be able to run the app. Won't do anything, but at least you should at least be able to see the selector view. The segmented control is what this is called, up at the top, and it should be the right size. All right, if it's not working for you, please raise your hand. Stefano. Oh, you had your hand up, but you put it down.
My views are still weird. They're still vertical constrained. I'm trying to undo them.
What? Sorry, what?
My views are still elongated. So I'm trying
Even
to,
when you run it?
before I went, like my
Oh yeah, I mean it's just it's storyboard editor being stupid. It's not actually that way. I don't know why it's not letting me make that smaller. That's dumb too, but probably if I wonder if I it's just being dumb. What matters is if you build and run it, it looks okay.
Hey, Andrew.
Yeah.
Because it looks okay when you run it, that's because of the vertical hugging priority, right?
Yeah.
Like it shrinks to where it's
Right. It's just I don't know why it's not rendering that way in the storyboard. It's just because the interface builder sizing stuff is not perfect. Is kind of buggy.
okay. Just making sure. Thanks.
I wouldn't be surprised if. No. Interesting. Yeah. Okay, so we're ready to continue on. Let's set up our table view controller. Really, all we need to do is add a prototype cell. We're just going to, well, I mean, there should be a prototype cell there, but set the style for it. We're just going to use the basic style and then give it a reuse identifier. And I'm going to call it student cell. That should be all we need to do in terms of layout and everything. The next thing we need to do is create our view controller subclasses. So I'm going to create a new group for view controllers. I'm going to create a view controller called main view controller. And I'm going to create another one called students table view controller. And then as usual in the storyboard, we need to set the classes of these. So the one on the left will be the main view controller and the one on the right will be the students table view controller. Okay, if you're not caught up, please raise your hand. Okay, good. All right. We need to create outlets and actions. We're actually only going to have one outlet and one action, and both will be on the main view controller. So open up the assistant editor. And all we're going to do is create an outlet for our segmented control. You can call this sort selector. And then we're also going to create an action. So it will call an action whenever somebody taps it to change it. And we'll just call the action sort. And well, yeah, we'll just call it sort. We don't need the sender type. It's fine. So outlet called sort selector, action called sort, both with the sorts or the segmented control. Which is suddenly the right size despite me doing nothing. Oh, and we probably should give these better names than first and second. So I'm going to say first name and last name. Okay. Now I think that's all we need to do, so we can switch back to writing code and get out of our storyboard. We do need to make it so that the main view controller has a reference to the table view controller. So we're going to add a variable for that. We'll make it private. Sorry, let me add some space so that's not all the way at the bottom. We'll call it students table view controller. We'll make it of type students table view controller, and I'm going to make it an implicitly unwrapped optional, so we don't have to unwrap it every time we use it. After all, if this is not set, something's seriously wrong, and we want to crash and figure it out. And then how do we set that? Well, this is embedded in this view controller using an embed segue. So prepare for segue will get called when that's happening, when the embed is happening. So we can do it then. We can say if segue.identifier equals embed students table view, let students table VC equals segue.destination as, and we'll force cast, because again, if it's not what we expect, then we want to know about it. And we'll set the property. So we now have a property that references the table view controller.
When you do the force cast, are there ever a situation where you're doing it in the prepare for the segues that you would do the question mark instead of exclamation mark? Like I think in a few projects in the past we used the optional one instead, optional casting. I was curious if there's a preference for one over the other as it applies to prepares for segue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to launch into my spiel too much, but remember that programming is not a series of rules to follow. It's you being creative to find solutions to problems, and this is subjective. Some people write it this way. You might use a guard statement, and fatal error. If it doesn't work, you might do something else. So I'm choosing to do this because I think in this particular case, if a segue with this identifier happens and its destination is not an instance of students table view controller, that means that I've done something wrong in my storyboard, and I want to find that at development time and fix it. But maybe you've got some other scenario where it's okay for it not to be a student's table view controller, or you don't like doing as exclamation mark because there's no message printed out. So you use guard and an as question mark and then do a fatal error in the else clause. There's lots of different ways to approach this problem, and this is just the one I'm choosing to use.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, so let's switch over to our table view controller and do stuff in there. We're going to delete. We don't need view did load or did receive memory warning. We don't need number of sections because we're not going to use that. We do need this. We do need self-erode index path, which is commented out for reasons I never have been able to understand because you always need to implement it. We don't need any of this stuff, and we don't need navigation. So delete everything except for number of rows in section and self-erode index path. And then we're just going to give this a property. called students. That's an array of students. By the way, I never really showed you, but student is a struct with only one property name. We're going to add some stuff to it, but that's what it starts with. And we'll give this an initial value of an empty array with a did set property observer. What do you think we should do in the did set property observer?
To make a call for like from the networking to get the.
Nope. This gets called, but good answer. Sorry, I shouldn't be so like, nope, you're wrong. I'm glad you answered. This is going to be called when the students array is set. And my idea is that the main view controller will be responsible for actually getting the array of students, and then it will just hand it off to the table view controller. So the table view controller won't be worrying about any of the networking or anything. It will just be saying, here's a property, give me some students to display.
So it's to update the UI, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Reload?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Perfect. So it needs to update its UI to display its students, which in this case means let's just reload the table view. And then for number of rows in section, we're just going to return the number of students we have. Sorry, I didn't see. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
I heard you before. It was just you and two people said, you and one other person said basically the same thing. So we reload the data. For our number of rows in section, we return the number of students. Configure cell, we're just going to put the name in the cell. We do need to set our reuse identifier. So this was student cell. And we can just do cell.textLabel.text equals students subindex path.row.name. All right. Anything else we need in this view controller? I think not. This is everything we need. So now we can get to the good stuff. Be in our main view controller. Okay, very first things first, we need to get the array of students to show. We're going to do that in view did load. When the view first loads, the main view controller's view first loads, we want to say, hey, load the students from the network. This week is all about networking. You're going to learn how to do this in detail. But for now, we're just going to use the network client struct and ask it to fetch recipes. Forgot that we need to create a network client. I'm going to create a private let property that is the network client. Just create an instance of it. And then we can say network client dot fetch recipes. And this method takes one argument, which is a completion closure. The completion closure takes two arguments, an optional array of students and an optional error, and it returns nothing, returns void. And we can use trailing closure syntax for it. So we just say network client.fetch recipes and then the closure. The first argument we'll call students, the second argument we'll call error. you notice that when we create this argument list, we do not need to specify the types. We don't need to do student like that. We could, this would work fine, but we don't need to because the compiler already knows what type this closure is, so it knows what type its arguments are, and we can just provide names instead of providing the types. It's another example of Swift doing type inference, where it can figure out types from context. And we also don't need the arrow void, although we could do that, because again, the compiler knows that, but also because void is a special case where even in a function, if you have a function that doesn't return anything, you don't actually have to say that, you just leave it off. Okay, what do we do after? So the network client goes and fetches recipes, which may take a while because it goes over the network, it might be slow. After it has finished doing that, after it's finished the network request and gotten data back from the server, it's going to call this completion closure with the results. Students, if that succeeded, if it failed, students will be nil and an error will be non-nil, indicating an error happened. So what do we want to do in this closure?
We want to continue processing, right?
Sure, continue processing, but specifically, what does continue processing mean?
We want to check if there's an error, and if not, we want to return the students. So if let error equals error. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, perfect. You got the first part of that right. So let's do that. Let's check to see if an error happened. And the way we know that is if the error is non-nil, then it means an error happened. So we can unwrap it. If it unwraps, if it's not nil, then we'll just log it. And return. All right. What happens if it succeeds? I mean, we want to assume it's going to succeed. What do we do if it succeeds?
Do we need to set the students in the table view controller?
Yeah, exactly. We now have an array of students. We want to actually give it to the table view controller. But I think the main view controller also should store this array of students. Besides just passing it to the table view controller, we're going to make the main view controller responsible for sorting. So we're going to add another property here. We're going to call it students, make it private. Oh, no, sorry. And we'll set that. And when that gets set, we're going to change this in a minute, but when that gets set, we want to also hand those off to the student's table view controller, right? So we'll store the property on main view controller, but we also want to pass it along to the student's table view controller to display it. So I'm going to do students table view controller dot students equals students. And then in here, we should be able to do self.students equals students. Oh, we need to unwrap it though. I'm going to use nil coalescing to unwrap it. So we don't actually expect there to ever not be an error and also not be any students, assuming network client's fetch recipes method is written correctly. But we don't really have easy way to express that with the compiler. We could express that to the compiler. We could do it. We'd have to write more complicated code. But so even though we don't expect students to be nil after we get an error, the compiler doesn't know that, so we need to unwrap it. Again, lots of approaches here. We could say, well, that's a real problem, and we should force unwrap it and crash if that happens, because that means something's wrong. But in this case, I'm going to use nil coalescing, and if students is nil, we'll just assume we'll just use an empty array instead, display nothing. Okay. At this point, should we be able to run our app and see some students show up?
No,
Why not?
we got to go back to the main queue.
I don't know who's talking.
Connor.
Oh, Connor. Okay. Explain that.
So when we do the in the network client, we have to go back onto like a background queue, I guess, to make the network, because it's going to take some time. And while that's going, we want to continue processing UI. So before we repopulate with the new students, we have to, because as you said in the videos, all UI needs to be updated on the main queue. So for us to do that, we have to hop back onto the main queue after it completes and, set all the labels accordingly.
Okay, but I'm not updating UI here. I'm just setting the students property. This is not UI kit.
I thought we were passing the students when they got set.
Yep.
So as we pass them, they it tries to set them in the students table view controller, but it won't because it's not on the main thread.
Okay, you're really close. I was trying to challenge you a little. You're
Okay.
right. Actually, what you said is right. I was just trying to challenge you a little. Because this is a case, and this was intentional in this project, this is a case where it's not obvious, right? You are correct that this code will get run on a background queue. And in fact, we can see that. If I run the app right now, you don't have to do this. I just want to show you. Put a breakpoint here. So the breakpoint means stop there, pause in the debugger when you get to that line of code. We can look over here. This is the call stack. We're running, the code that's running right now that we're stopped in is closure number 1 and main view controller did load. And you notice that it's on thread 2. Well, thread 1 is always the main thread, the main queue. And you see that it actually says com.apple.main thread and it's serial. This is the main queue. We're running this code in thread 2, which is a background thread. Any thread other than thread 1 is a background thread. So based on the number 1 rule of concurrency that I mentioned in the video, we are not allowed to use UIKit API on a background thread. But when we look at this, we say, well, I'm not using UIKit API. I'm just setting self.students. This is not UIKit. And even if you come down here and you say, yeah, that's true, but you're also going to trigger this did set, which will also run on that thread too, because why not? You're setting the table view controller's students array. This starts to be a little bit of a hint to you and probably should raise a red flag, but actually in and of itself, it's still not wrong, because while this is a subclass of UI table view controller, the student's property itself is not UIKit API. That's a property that we added. The real problem is that if you go look at if you go look at that property, it also has a did set, which will also get called on thread 2, where it reloads the table view. And table view most certainly is UIKit class, and reload data is UIKit API. So this is actually where the problem is. This, if we put a breakpoint here and run it, just by coincidence, we're on thread 6 now. It's because the system chooses which thread to actually use, and don't worry about it. But it's still a background thread. Yeah, continue to that next breakpoint. We're here in this did set. We're right about to call table view.reload data, and we're doing that on thread 6, and that's wrong. Now the good news is if we run Xcode's main thread API checker, which is on by default, will flag us and say UI table view.reload data must be used from the main thread only. So how should we solve this? We really have 2, maybe you could even argue 3 choices. Fundamentally, go ahead.
I would wrap the UIKit call, table view.reload data, in a async, main thread async dispatch.
Okay, I want you to expand on that, but first, before you do that, I want to mention that there are a couple options. We could fundamentally, we need to make sure that table view.reload data happens on the main queue or the main thread, and to do that, we want to dispatch something back to the main queue. The code that's actually going to do that should be dispatched back to the main queue. We could do that dispatch here. That would solve the problem because it would make sure that self.students only gets set on the main queue, and therefore this would run on the main queue, and therefore table view.reload data would run on the main queue. We could also put dispatch .main.async in here, same thing. Or we could go all the way down to where the reload data actually happens and wrap just this call in dispatch q.main.async. And William, you said that you would do it here. Can you?
I would do it there, yes.
Why would you do it there?
That way, you don't have to remember every time you set the students property of students table view controller that you need to run that particular assignment in the main thread.
Great. I like that line of thinking. So any of the ways I just outlined would work. They would fix this problem. One thing I don't like about only doing it here is that, sure, right now this is a simple class. We only ever set self.students in one place. And so it's relatively easy to control. But in a real app, in a bigger view controller, you might be setting this in multiple places. Maybe every time we sort, for example, we do a network call. And you'd have to remember every time you did that to wrap this in a dispatch q.main.async. And furthermore, right now it's really obvious because we run the app, we get that main thread API checker flag, but even without that, like, we don't have to go very far down, right? We go down one level and then one more level, and we see the UI kit call. But bigger apps can have much farther descents into other code where it's not so obvious just by thinking that that's going to happen. And also things change over time. So maybe when we first write the app, this is not triggering any UIKit API calls. And then later we make a modification in a completely different file that means that it does. Well, we have to be thinking hard enough and smart enough to know, oh, I got to go back to this other file that I wasn't even working on and change something. If instead we do that here, we're moving responsibility for only calling UIKit API on the main queue to the place where the UIKit call is happening. And now no other class needs to particularly worry about this. They can set students and just assume things will work, and that will be a safe assumption. One more thing though, what if we wrap both of them? What if we put a dispatch q.main.async here and another one here? What would happen?
I can only imagine it executes the first closure, which then executes the second closure, both on the main queue, but you pay the overhead for doing two dispatches.
Yeah, so you'd have two dispatches. It would mean that the table view would reload slightly slower. It would take an extra. Really, what it means is it would take an extra run loop cycle, which is about a 60th of a second. So yes, you would pay that penalty, but otherwise it would work fine. And probably the user is not going to be able to tell a difference between, they've already waited a second for their network data to come in. An additional 60th of a second is not going to matter, and it's going to be imperceptible. So at least in terms of application safety, you would be fine. Now that doesn't mean you want to do it, because little delays do build up over time, and it's kind of weird. But I just wanted to point out that if you did it in both places, you wouldn't be breaking everything. Okay, so let's do that. Right here, we're going to say dispatch q.main.async, and then we'll put the table view.reload data inside that. Now let's run the app again. Oh, this brings up a really important point. If you try to build this right now, it'll say implicit use of self enclosure. Use self dot to make capture semantics explicit. A thorough discussion of why this happens is kind of beyond the scope of today, and we will talk about it in a later week. But when you code in a closure, if you're accessing something on self like this, table view is a property of a UI table view controller. Normally, we can and do just omit the self dot because the compiler is able to figure out from context that that's what you mean. We use it in initializers. We use it anytime we have a variable that has the same name as the property and we want to disambiguate. But in a closure, you always have to say self. Well, take that as accurate for now. There is an exception, but we're not ready to talk about it. But in a closure, you always have to say self dot. You cannot just use the property name. Luckily, you'll get a compiler error if you forget, so it's easy to spot. But just know that if you see this error, all you need to do is add a self dot anywhere you were using a property on self. Make sense? Okay, let's run the app. And it should load the list of students. The sort thing won't do anything yet. We haven't hooked that. We haven't written any of the code for that. But you should at least be able to get the list. I want everybody to run your code, see if this works, and if it doesn't work, raise your hand.
I see your main view controller again.
It's about as much as I can fit on screen.
No, that's perfect. I just have a weird error and I don't know what's coming.
Okay, does that mean everybody's working? That's great news. Let's take a break. We'll be back here in 5 minutes. Okay, we're back. Ready to start again? And the next thing we need to implement is sorting. I want to make sure everybody's back because a bunch of you still have your video turned off. So if you're back, please turn your video on. All right, there's Will, and Simon says he's back. Okay. We don't need this, by the way, so I'm going to delete it. So when the sort selector changes, we want to change what we're sorting by. We're going to sort by either first name or last name. Well, if you look at student, it doesn't have a first name and last name property. So how are we going to sort by first name or last name?
You could separate it by the space.
Yeah.
And then
Yep, that's what we're going to do. Where should we do that? Yeah, so Will said a calculated property for first/last name, and that is the approach I want to take. We could also do it in the closures that we pass to the sort function. There's no reason you couldn't do it there, but you're going to end up repeating yourself every time you want to sort by either first name or last name. You're going to have to write pretty similar code, and it's going to make those closures kind of long and hard to read. And I think it makes more sense to add computed properties for those. So we'll add a computed property for first name, and we can say first equals name dot split, and then pass in a space. So this says take name, split it into an array of strings using a space as the separator. So anytime you see a space, that means there's a new string coming up. So this basically splits it into an array of words. Will, I want to talk through that idea. Why do you think that's the better route?
Because then you're doing the split operation once
Instead of
rather
every
than
time.
twice, and then when you want to check the names, you aren't doing any work. So if you're sorting them and doing a ton of comparisons and accessing those properties over and over again, you're relying on the compiler to potentially cache those results or something versus you're just accessing a string every time.
Yes, so you're right. The only complication there is that did set is not called during initialization. So if all you do is add a did set to the name property, first name and last name won't be set initially when initialization happens. You'd have to also implement a custom initializer that did the splitting then as well. There's no reason you couldn't do that. And I agree with you that this is a potential performance penalty because you're running this code calculating the same results over and over and over again every time first name or last name is accessed. And particularly when we start sorting an array, that's going to happen potentially a huge number of times. So it's good that you've looked out for that. But there's also a sort of maxim in programming that premature optimization is the root of all evil. And you shouldn't try to predict what's going to be slow. You should just write things the way that it makes sense to you and then measure whether they're slow or not. And if they are, then make changes. So we're going to follow that for now because it turns out that with a list of 14 or 16 or however many students are in this list, it's pretty hard to make it slow. And this works fine. But I appreciate you bringing that up. That's it's good to be thinking along those lines.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. That's a good maxim that you just came up with.
Yeah, I didn't come up with it. That's a Donald Knuth quote. Donald Knuth is a famous computer scientist and author. But yeah, it is good. I like it. Okay, so that splits it into an array, and then we just want the first thing in the array. So we're just going to get the first thing using index of 0. Now, for reasons that are complicated and annoying, split does not actually return an array of strings. If you option click on this, it returns an array of something called a substring, which is not the same as a string. It's not the same type as a string. There are reasons for this, some good, some arguable. But it does mean that what we get back from this is not actually a string, it's a substring. So we need to turn it into a string. Luckily, there's an initializer for string that takes a substring and turns it into a regular string. So we can just wrap the whole thing in a string initializer. And then we can just return that. We don't actually need to do let. Okay. Then let's do last name. So this is going to be a little different. We're still going to split by a space, but we don't actually know. I mean, we could use count -1 to get the index of the last one. That fails if count is only 1. We get the same last name as we got for the first name, which we don't really want. So actually what we're going to do is say that last name is optional. It's partly contrived, but it's also partly based on the real world where, well, actually it's based on, when I was teaching one of the 101 courses, somebody was very vocal about the fact that some people only have a first name and don't have a last name. And I think it's because she only had a first name and not a last name. But anyway, last name, we're going to make it optional. So we're going to get this is all of the word. This is an array of all of the words, all of the names that make up the name. We're going to get the last one. So we'll say last equals this dot last. The last property on array returns an optional, because if the array is empty, sorry, we got to change this, but if the array is empty, then you won't get anything. Now, of course, if they only have a first name, this is still going to be the same as the first name. So we can, before that, do drop first. This says take this array, drop the first element, and then take the last element of what you've got now. And that will work. This will still be optional. It will be the last thing, not including the one that we are returning for first name. Yeah, we're going to return it. I'm building this up. So, but this could be nil. So we're actually going to guard against that. So we're going to say last guard let last equals this, else return nil. The only reason we're doing that is because we actually have to pass that thing into string, the string initializer that takes a substring, because again, this is actually a string.subsequence, which is the same thing as substring. And we don't want that. We want a string. And unfortunately, you cannot if you pass an optional in here, that doesn't work. You have to pass a non-nil substring. So we do have to unwrap this before we pass it into the string initializer.
Is there a way to convert a string into a substring so you can do, say, nil coalescing and select either last or name?
You mean turn a substring into a string?
No, because you want to do the nil coalescing operator, right? You want to do
sure.
If it's nil, if the substring is nil, pick a different substring.
Oh, well, I mean, that's not what we're doing though, right? We're saying if substring is nil, then return nil. If it's not nil, we got to do this one more thing with it, right?
String is a collection now. So it's no longer a struct. So is that possible? What he's saying, though, hypothetically?
I think I may be not understanding exactly what Will's asking. String is a collection now. Collections are also it is still a struct. Collection is a protocol, but string is still a struct. It's just a struct that conforms to collection now. And I don't think that changes anything about what he's asking.
I thought substrings share storage with strings now.
They do.
Okay.
They do.
I just checked that and it works. So
Well,
that's the way to
so
do it.
share your screen because I'm curious. I don't know what it is. I don't think I understand what you were trying to do.
Share.
Oh, you actually did put it.
Yeah. So
Okay.
here it is, right? So if you do the last name, you split based on the space, and then
Yes.
you can just make this into a substring, and then pick either one. This could be like an empty string if you prefer, but
Oh,
I would-
sure, yes, yeah, you can do that. But the behavior of what the code you wrote is different than the behavior of the code I wrote.
Right. Mine
No.
isn't optional.
Right,
So-
yours is not optional. You've decided that if there is no last name, meaning, well, and the other thing is yours will only actually trigger if the string is empty, name is empty, right?
If there's, well, this is it, right? Is that if someone only has one name, that is technically also their last name. Is both their
So
first and their last name.
That's what I thought until somebody was very vocal about no. Some people have a first name and no last name. They don't have the same first name and last name. They have a first name and not a last name. And
Yeah, I can see that being the thing, but there's also like, if you want to sort by it.
Yeah. So I mean, the reason I'm doing this is to cover how we actually will sort by this.
Okay.
When it could be nil. To some degree, the explanation for that is contrived, but it's intentional on my part that this is optional.
Right. Okay.
What you did will work, but it's different behavior than this, right? It's different than return nil if there is no last name. Okay, so let me share my screen. That was a long discussion for something that was probably not that interesting to all of you, but there you go. All right, so now that we have computed properties for first and last name, we should be able to write some sort code. There's various ways we could do this, as always, but there are actually several times when we want to sort. And I think the easy way to do this is to add, and what do we, by the way, what do we do with the sorted, after we've sorted students, what do we do with the sorted array of students?
Pass it to the table view?
Yeah, pass it to the table view controller. We actually don't necessarily want to store it ourselves. I mean, we could, we'd want to add a second property. The problem is, again, that last name is going to be annoying to deal with. But we could just sort this in place. That's a thing too. I'm not going to do it that way. I just want to show you the way, a way of doing it that I think is good and provides a pattern that will work well. I'm actually going to create a function called update sort. We can call this anytime we want to sort the array and give the newly sorted version of it to the table view controller. We will do this when the user taps the sort selector, but we can also do it. We also will want to do it when we get a new array of students in, or when the view first loads. Well, which is the same thing, right? That's the only time we'll get new students in this case, but. So we're going to create an array called sorted students. It's an array of students. And then we need to decide how we're going to sort it. So the way we sort it is going to depend on which of these is selected. We can get which one is selected by saying sort selector dot selected segment index. If this is 0, then we know we should sort by first name. Otherwise, we'll sort by last name. So let's sort by first name first, because that's the easy one. How do we sort this? Anybody know? Simon, I saw you unmute.
Say sorted students equals students dot sort, and then
Yeah, students dot sort. It turns out it's not sort. You see that that's crossed out. That's crossed out for a different reason, but sort sorts the array in place, meaning it takes an existing array and sorts it without creating a new one. That only works if your array is a var, which this one is, but we don't actually want to sort it in place. We want to sort it and assign that to a new array. So if you do that by Swift naming convention, it's sorted instead of sort, meaning take this, sort it, and then return that without modifying the original. So we're going to do sorted by, and then this takes a closure. And we can write all this code, right? We can say student 1, student 2. This is asking for a bool that returns true if student 1 comes before student 2 in the list, false otherwise. So if we're sorting by first name, how do we determine which one comes first?
Is there a dot first method on it?
Say that again.
Is there a dot first method?
No, there's not. That's a good guess, but there's not.
You do the one that's less than?
Yeah, so we say student 1 less than student 2. Less than, in this case, we're comparing we're comparing students. That won't actually work, but we want to compare first names though, right? But less than is exactly what we want. It will tell us if one comes before the other. We need to use the first name property. So we're used to using less than for numbers, but less than in Swift, it also works for strings, and it just uses the default sorting for strings, which is alphabetically. Turns out that's more complicated than it sounds, because that's actually an operation that has to be localized depending on what language you're working in.
The sort selector method, where are you getting that? Sorry, I just got an error, and apparently I probably didn't log it.
This?
Yeah.
It's an outlet that points to this.
The outlet, I didn't connect. Got it. Okay, that's what my computer crashed. Sorry.
All right, so this should work. But we can simplify this a lot because of the nice things that closure syntax gives us. So number one, we can use trailing closure syntax to get rid of the parentheses and the argument label. So I'll delete that, and then we also need to delete this closing parenthesis. We don't actually need to say return because there's only one line, and it will just use the result of that. Sorry, that's not students. It should be student 2. And then we actually don't need this either. We can get rid of that. And instead of saying student 1 and student 2, we can use $0 for the first argument and $1 for the second argument. And then, of course, we can put that all in one line because it's only one line and it's pretty short. And write the whole thing like that instead. Okay, I want everyone to give me a 1 to 5 on how, in chat, a 1 to 5 on how they feel about what we just did there with that closure and the sorted method and all of that. Sorry, I should have said 1 to 3, but I'll count 5s as 3s. Okay, seems like everybody's in good shape. But to recap, we're asking the students array to sort itself and provide that new sorted version. It doesn't know how to sort, right? I mean, it could assume you just want to sort things alphabetically, but students are not even strings. They're actually structs with a string property. So we have to, it needs our help to figure out how to sort these things. It basically It has a sort algorithm, and that sort algorithm relies on being able to look at two items in the array and tell, well, should this one come first or last, just between these two. Because it doesn't know how to tell that for any two items, it's allowing us to provide a way to do that comparison in the form of a closure. The closure is a lot like a function. So basically, we're handing the sorted method a function that takes two students and returns, determines and then returns which one comes first, and it does that using a bool because it's one or the other. So the sorted method will run through its sort algorithm, whatever that means, however that works. And every time it needs to compare two items, it will, instead of trying to do that itself, it will say, well, this closure knows how to do it. It will call the closure, pass in the two students it's trying to compare, and then use the result of that to figure out how they should be sorted. And so all we have to do in our closure is take two students that are passed in and determine which one should come first. It's pretty easy to do that because we can just get the first name properties from both and then use the existing less than operator. And if first name for the first student comes before first name for the second student in alphabetical order, this whole expression will return true. Otherwise, it will return false. Okay, now let's do sort by last name. This is going to be slightly more complicated. We'll say students dot sorted student 1, student 2. We can't just do return student 1 dot last name less than student 2 dot last name. You can try that and you'll get an error that says value of optional type string not unwrapped. Did you mean to use exclamation or question mark? No, we don't. So what if one of these is nil? The problem is you can't compare two optionals with less than. We have to unwrap these first before we compare them. What if one of them is nil? Do we want to say it comes first or last? Do we know? I don't know. I say we defer that to the, I say we just kind of like let it work however it wants to work. And it seems like a pretty natural way to do that is if either one of these is nil, just replace it with an empty string. So if last name for student 1 is nil, you can replace it with an empty string with nil coalescing. So now we're saying student 1 dot last name, or if that's nil, an empty string. And then compare that with the same thing, student 2 dot last name, or if that's nil, an empty string. And once again, we can simplify this by using trailing closure syntax and not giving those explicit names, but just using $0 and $1 and getting rid of the return statement and putting everything on one line. And now we've got our sorted students, and we can hand those off to our table view controller so that it will display the sorted version. Okay, then we need to call that whenever the sort criteria changes. So our sort action gets called when the user taps on the segmented control. That's a great time to update the sort. We also want to update sort when we get new students. Seems like doing that in did set would be a good place to do it. So we're actually going to update the sort in did set instead of setting this, and then this will get set. The students array on the table view controller gets set in update sort, so it replaces the use of that. And build failed. What are they? Oh, I just accidentally typed that thing there. Should be able to build and run. They should show up. by default, they're sorted by first name. We pick last name, they resort themselves by last name. And you can swap back and forth.
Can you return back to that block of that function we were writing so I can get the last line?
Yes.
You also mentioned something about changing something somewhere else, but after the setting the value in the sorted students.
Yeah, yes. For those of you that have hit into this runtime error, this is on purpose. I want to talk about it. You're talking about that, right? I changed the did set for the students property to update sort because if this changes, for example, because we just loaded students from the network, we need to sort those and give the students table view controller the new values. Samantha's question in chat about sorting using less than, and it prioritized capital letters before lowercase letters. I don't think I knew off the top of my head that that's how the less than operator worked, but that doesn't surprise me. Less than is great for simple stuff and for showing how easy sorting strings can be or whatever, but it's actually not the correct way to sort strings in a real app, because comparing strings is an operation that should be localized. Localized means it should be done differently for different languages. So it's different in English than it is in Russian than it is in Japanese, etc. And so really, instead of using less than, you should use this method called localized compare, which takes into account the user's current, what language the user's device is set to. Oh, actually, yes, it's localized standard compare you're supposed to use. Anyway, so don't actually use less than for stuff you're presenting to a user that you expect to be sorted truly correctly. Yeah. And if you want to challenge, go change your sort for these to use localized standard compare. It's a little more complicated than just using less than. Andrew, you have no errors, but your sorting doesn't work. You mean you tap this and just nothing happens?
Yeah, when I tap it, it just looks the same.
Did you hook up? Are you sure you have this action hooked up?
Let me check. I'm pretty sure I do.
Aha! We also have this problem where we're using UIKit API on the background queue.
That's what. Yeah, I tried it a few times to make sure that was not a problem. It is the sort issue. I missed that. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jonathan, I would say take a look at that yourself. Maybe it's the same thing.
Yeah, I forgot to put, or I didn't put update sort in the actual button.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay.
Should update sort be updated on the main thread, because I'm crashing on the update sort function, or the function, but the line sort dot selected index.
Well, you heard me say like a couple times that I know this is a problem, and we're about to talk about it, right?
Well, no, I mean I can't even build.
Oh, you can't even build. Well, that's a different. That's not a threading issue. If you want to share your screen.
Well, actually, hold on. Let me see something. Let me try this. Okay, and yeah, so let me. Yeah, so hold on. Let me share my screen. I have this error here.
Oh,
Ah,
that's
I didn't click on that error. Yeah. So where's that coming from?
that's because your student's table view controller is nil.
Yes.
I don't know why it's nil. I can't see enough to know, but check to make sure that.
Okay.
Check to make sure that the segue identifier. I mean, was it working before we started the sorting stuff? I don't know if that's a yes or a no, but check to make sure your segue identifier is matches.
Yes, sorry, I muted. Yes, it was building before, but I'll go back and check it.
Okay. All right, so we have this problem where, oh, hey, by the way, you're using UIKit API on a background thread, and this is, not obvious, right? We didn't notice this right away. Well, it's because sort selector is UIKit view. It's a UI segmented control, and we're using API in update sort, and update sort is being
Did you
called.
share your screen?
Oh yeah, sorry, I always forget that. Update sort is being called from self.students equals students here, which is in the network client's completion closure, which is called run on a background queue. So we need to make sure this only happens on the main queue. Again, we have multiple ways of doing this. What do you think is best?
Wrap the whole thing in a dispatch main async queue.
Yeah, I think we should just do this right here, dispatch queue.main.async, and then just put all of this code in that. And we know it's okay.
It's probably outside the scope of this lesson, but would you prefer doing that over decoupling the sorting from the UI?
I like the idea of decoupling the sorting from the UI, but it's just going to make this code a lot more complicated. So yeah, beyond the scope of this lesson, but no, I think decoupling the sorting code from the UI is a great idea. But to do that, you'd have to have, when this changes, you set some property, and then you.
Yeah, you just have to cache the value of the the segment index.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's run it and see if that is fixed. Oh, nope, we need all of our self dots. So we have to put self dot on everything that is a property of self, because now all of this code is in a closure. And it works, and no error, no runtime error is being flagged, and everything's working okay. All right, if it's not, if you've got this far and it's working, please raise your hand. And if it's not working and you have a problem other than, oh, I'm just still typing or whatever, pipe up, because I'm happy to help.
I think I accidentally took out something because I have no names in my table view. But I can't see where I did that. Return.
Just a sec. Okay, sorry. Carolyn, what were you saying?
I think I accidentally took something out because my table view shows no names.
Oh, okay.
But I need to compare the code to see what I did.
But it was working before we started the sorting stuff.
Yes. In fact, when we put the update sort in the did set, I didn't get any names either.
Do you want to share your screen?
Okay. I am trying to add what we had there before. Let's see. So this, I had taken this out because it didn't look like it was there.
Yeah, you shouldn't need that.
Okay.
And let's look at your update sort. Yeah, so you're just forgetting you sort the students. You do have a warning there. You sort you initialize the sorted students constant, but then you don't actually do anything with it. And you need to set the table view controller's sorted student or table view controller students property using that, right? After you've done the sort.
We're not using it here.
So let me share my screen again so I can show you.
Okay.
I guess I can stop you myself, apparently. That's cool. Okay, so in update sort, we're declaring a constant called sorted students. We're not giving it its initial value right in line here. Instead, its initial value depends on whether we're sorting by first name or last name. So here we're sorting by first name and assigning that to the sorted students constant. Here we sort by last name instead. Either way, all we're doing is initializing this variable that we declared. We're not doing anything else with it. We also have to hand it, after we've done that, after we've initialized it with our sorted students, we have to hand it off to the table view controller. So this is the line you're missing.
Oh, I see it, thanks.
Does that make sense? Okay, good.
Yes.
Andrew, are you stuck? You just didn't.
No, sorry, I forgot to raise my hand. Raised.
David, are you stuck?
I'm still crashing. My student table view is still nil. I thought it was a misspelling, but it's not. I refactored all the variable names correctly, but they're not.
Can you zip your project up and Slack it to me?
Sure.
Okay, so we're finished early. We're finished earlier than I thought we would finish. I'm trying to decide what would be best. All right, I'm going to give you a challenge. This challenge is kind of a duplicate of something you're going to do in the afternoon project. challenge is to add a text field right below the sort selector. And the text field should let you search. And when you search, it should filter these to only show things that contain the thing typed into the search field. David, that did not actually get uploaded. I just saw the name of the file. There we go.
Do we need a text view and a search button?
You can do it that way. Sure. Text field and a search button.
Okay.
That's fine.
What did you originally say? Just the text field?
Just a text field, but it's fine. You can do it with a button. That's fine.
Okay.
It's possible to make it so that a text field, does an action when you hit return without a separate button. But if a button's easier, that's fine.
I think there's actually an event where you can just pick up whenever anyone types anything in there and continue to
Yes.
get it.
You can also find out even when they type a single letter. But I'm not that worried about how you do the text field handling. It's the filtering that I'm interested in.
Wait, can we use a search bar like from the objects library?
You could use a search bar, but you're going to end up writing more code to do it that way than if you used a text field. But yes, if you want to do it with a search bar, go ahead.
Is there like any advantages to using a search bar?
Yes, search bar does a bunch of stuff for you. You can put it right in the table view and get the thing where it sits above the top row and then only comes into view when you scroll down, which you've probably seen in iOS apps. Search bar has a bunch of additional functionality, but again, this is to practice the filter part, not the UI. David, I'm looking at yours right now. It is crashing, but I don't know why quite yet, but I'll figure it out. Okay, it's very simple. It's because you don't have an identifier set for the segue in the storyboard. I mean, the embed segue for the table view, it doesn't have an identifier.
Ah, very simple.
Your stack view is also not really quite right, but
Yeah, I sent you a message in Slack about that.
oh. What kind of new Mac did you get?
Well, new-ish. It's the one we get with the experiment. It's,
okay.
Yeah.
Good, cool. All right, so you've got a challenge to add a search field. Otherwise, we're done. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, go to lunch and be back at noon to start on the project.
Thank you.